On today's show, Bill DiFilippo joins me to talk about Seth Lundy, Penn State grad, and also Hawks' second-round pick. And then we talked about John Collins and the trade, all the ramifications there from a national standpoint. We get into all of that and more on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1510 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday afternoon/evening. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today. Please make us your first listen each and every day on this podcast. Lovely Locked On Hawks, and subscribe on places like Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And if you're watching on YouTube, you already see this person. If you've read the description, you already have potentially planned for this. I am joined once again by my friend Bill DiFilippo of Dime. Bill, we have a real main topic to get to later on in this podcast, and I'll let you sort of set it up a little bit. But I'm bringing you on this podcast mostly. You're qualified to talk about many things, but we've been joking about this for quite some time, and then it actually happened. Bill is maybe the foremost. I won't give you the absolute. Maybe you are the foremost Penn State basketball aficionado in the world. I'm not even kidding. You might be. If you're not anyone not employed by Penn State basketball, Bill might be next on the list of people like most dug into Penn State basketball. And the Hawks drafted someone from Penn State. So, Bill, it's Seth Lundy time. In a second, save it a little bit. It's coming. Thank you for being on the podcast, though. I appreciate it.
It's great to be here, Brad. And I think everyone needs to be aware that on Wednesday, May 24th at 7:04 p.m., you sent me a message in Slack that's in our Slack that says, when the Hawks draft Seth Lundy at 46, you're coming on for an hour. And you meant it as well, here's the thing, like you meant it as a joke. And
kind of,
but at the same time, like it's plausible enough that we were both like, oh yeah, haha, that's funny. And then it happened, and I laughed for about 20 minutes. But yeah, we'll get to that later. Thanks for having me on. Always great to be here. Always great to be locked on the Atlanta Hawks with you.
Thank you, sir, for doing this. But yeah, obviously you've been on the show before. You're not exclusively on this podcast talking about Penn State basketball, although we'll get to that in a second. While I have you, though, before we dive into Lundy talk, the Hawks made a trade the other day. It's still relatively fresh. And, I haven't had anybody nationally on the podcast yet. No one that's like dug into the Hawks only space about that particular transaction. So I'm not even going to tee you up at all. What did you make of the Hawks trading John Collins to Utah and kind of where they stand after that transaction?
It was a weird one, right? I think that it's really easy to look at this in the easiest way that you possibly can, which was the Hawks viewed it as important to get off of John Collins' salary. And for how much, Rudy Gobert, not Rudy Gobert, he's a different guy, Rudy Gay has done in this league. I think you probably agree with me, Bradley, that the Atlanta Hawks weren't going, all right, awesome, we're going to get Rudy Gay. He's going to be a major contributor for us. Him and his 5.2 points in 14.6 minutes per game last year. That's what we need. And I think it's really easy to look at it as just straight salary dump, straight get literally anything back for John. But I think it's a really good example. I mentioned this. I went on to the Just Basketball pod with our pals Brendan Clean and Chris Manning. Legends. I mentioned it's a really good reminder of how when you want to trade a guy, when you view it's important to trade a guy, dragging your feet because you are so desperate to say that you won the deal above everything else, that ultimately is going to end up hurting you and what you get back in the deal in the long run. I mean, how long ago, Brad, because you're far more aware of Atlanta Hawks things than me. How long ago were we talking about Collins as a guy that could be traded and Atlanta could get back a first round pick? Atlanta can get back, contributor, guys who can contribute on the roster, whatever. It wasn't long ago that we were talking about Collins in that context.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to even before he signed the deal that he's on right now, which is, oftentimes when we refer to him, it's sort of that round number, like, he's been in trade rumors for 3 years or so. And it's actually true. I mean, and it was different iterations because they looked at trading him potentially before they signed him. they made the big run of the conference finals. Good timing there if you're John Collins to maybe, obviously the Hawks they were not trying to make huge changes after that. So end up paying him. They should have squeezed him more. I've been on that train since the day it happened. They should have negotiated harder with him, even as someone who's very high on John. But yeah, it wasn't long ago. I think if they had done this transaction, even at the deadline, they would have gotten more. And especially a year ago in the offseason, they would have gotten much more. And look, sometimes it's like, I talked about this a little bit yesterday on the podcast, and I got a couple of responses that were like, well, who cares? I'm like, well, okay, I get it. I'm not saying that you have to go to your grave furious about the return for John Collins, but it is just worth noting that the process here was not optimal. I think if you gave the Hawks Truth Serum as an organization or whoever you want to choose, they would acknowledge, like, look, we didn't handle this particularly well as far as like, not to make this like cold calculating, but managing the asset of John Collins.
Right.
Like they couldn't have traded him at a worse time for his value. He just had a pretty shaky season by his standards, and he's making a lot of money that they gave him. They should have traded him before, all this stuff. And then, to your point, they've been announcing it and banging the drum for so long that, like, all due respect, every single person in the league knew that this is what they wanted to do. So your leverage goes out the window. And Danny Ainge is like a master of extracting teams that have no leverage like this. Like, I'm actually kind of surprised that Utah did the trade that they did, because I bet you Danny was even asking for more from the Hawks, knowing the way that he usually negotiates. But, all that said, like, I did the whole thing a little bit in sort of short form fashion yesterday. But if you go from the Collins thing and even Kevin Huerter, if you want to package those things together and say, was the management of these two guys who you nailed in the first round optimal? I think everyone would say no to that. And it's just kind of like, what's next, basically? You kind of have to just forget that. If you're the Hawks, you can't dwell on that. It's over now. It's kind of like when Travis Schlenk, not quite this bad, I'll be very clear, but when Travis Schlenk got hired, the first thing he did, you may have forgotten this, Bill, the first thing Travis Schlenk did when he got hired was trade Dwight Howard in a bad transaction. Like, he just had to get Dwight off the roster. He just decided that was going to happen. John was not toxic like Dwight Howard was,
right?
But sometimes you just got to have to pull a ripcord and say, okay, we're doing it, and next. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you enjoy the DFS space, make sure to check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks Daily Fantasy made easy. It's amazing. I know that you will love it as well. It's very easy to use. I've been playing there for quite some time now. It's really a breeze to operate within the PrizePicks space. All you have to do is pick 2-6 players, actually choose whether more or less than a certain number of points or rebounds, assists. In baseball, it's like total bases or runs, or football, it's yards or touchdowns, etc. And you have 25 times the money on your entries with PrizePicks. They have sports across the board that you might happen to enjoy, like the NBA, college basketball, WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, NHL, PGA, soccer, esports, and much more. And a whole entry can be done in just a minute or less. It's that easy and that quick. Plus, it's just you against the numbers. They have safe and fast withdrawals at PrizePicks. They're operating in more than 30 states now, including Georgia and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app right now on PrizePicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. If you're a first-time user, get 100% instant deposit match of $100 with promo code Locked On. Again, don't forget that promo code. It is Locked On, and sign up for instant deposit match up to $100. Check it out now at PrizePicks.
Yeah, and it's pretty telling to me. You mentioned Danny Ainge, and I think mentioning Danny Ainge is right here, because Danny Ainge is probably the best executive in the league at realizing when he can strike and when he can do one of two things: either trade a guy at the very height of their value and be able to get back the absolute most for that guy. Like, he turned essentially Colin Sexton and Isaiah Thomas, with Isaiah Thomas's hip like not working, into Kyrie Irving. Like, the guy just knows how to pull off deals like that. Or he knows when to look around and find a guy who is really good, is really talented, but you're not going to need to trade to get rid of too much in order to acquire him. And he got that in John. Like you mentioned with John, played in 71 games last year. What was his issue? A thumb injury, Brad?
It's a finger. Like, it looks more... It looks gross, and I think there's been a little bit in some corners too much put on the finger, but also maybe not enough too. Like it, and he keeps saying it doesn't matter. You're right, I have the beholder, but it's his finger, and it looks, if you ever see it up close, it looks absolutely disgusting. And it has for like a year plus now.
Yeah, so he had, going through last season with some sort of injury that was compromising his ability to play basketball, and in a situation in Atlanta that it was just weird all year. I mean, you know, it seemed obvious that at some point they were going to get rid of the head coach and replace him with someone midway through the season. And they ended up doing that for the second time in 2 years, 3 years, whatever it ended up being.
2, yeah.
And then they made very clear this new head coach, along with the new guys in the front office, which there was also front office overhaul, everyone is going to be able to come together and shape the roster in any way that they see fit. And if you're a guy like John, or if you're basically any guy but Trey, and I guess to an extent DeJounte Murray, even though it now seems like he might be, like there's some reporting out there that everyone but Trey.
He's at least available-ish.
Yeah.
Different level of available than the other guys, but he's available-ish.
So if you're a guy like John, who you know you're on the trade block and you're injured and you're potentially unsettled, like all these things are kind of coming together. Of course, the team that trades for you is going to be able to get you at a discount. The surprise to me is just the extent to which the Hawks the Hawks did this deal as part of a discount. Like that was a little bit surprising to me. Even if, I love the idea of John in Utah because I like that the Utah Jazz are going, we don't care about positions. We just want to get as many good basketball players as we possibly can. So why not?
Yeah, I think, people that listen to the podcast know that I'm pretty high on Collins, but I think he is a very, very, very obvious buy low candidate, just in a lot of different ways. And that doesn't mean he's suddenly an all-star. I think there's this feeling because I am high on him that I think he's like this transcendent player, and he's not. I do believe that he is currently undervalued in the NBA, and that was seen by this return. And, your friend and mine, Jake Fisher, came on this podcast last week and basically said, look, the Hawks might have to actually attach an asset to trade John Collins. And people were like, whoa, really? I'm like, well, I wouldn't terribly surprised, even as someone who, again, is high on him. And if you look at it this way, they kind of did attach an asset. Like, as far as the press release is concerned, they can say, oh, we got a pick from Utah. But that is not a good pick. It's a second-round pick that's kind of protected and not very good. And Rudy Gay's negative salary is almost like attaching something to John Collins. You know what I mean? Like, that's always gets overlooked. It happened once a long time ago with the DeAndre Hunter trade where the Hawks took some bad money along with him. And I was like, guys, that's a negative asset, like not a positive one. You have to, and Rudy Gay is, like you said earlier, nice career. Rudy Gay is dead salary at this point in time. So you're taking that back. All that said, it wasn't great. We'll see what the free agent landscape is. I'm not going to ask you to go through free agents that could go with the Hawks because they have the mid-level now, whether they use it or not. But also, as you've been chronicling, I'm sure at Dime and other places, they may not be done. We'll see if they trade DeAndre Hunter. We'll see if they trade Clint Capella. None of that will surprise me. I believe Zach Lowe talked even yesterday about like the Siakam thing that Jake's reported on and how Siakam's that's kind of real interest. I don't know how real it is as far as negotiations are concerned, but they may not be done, Bill. So I guess prepare your blogs.
We will do as much preparing of our blogs as we possibly can. But I went back while you were talking there and I looked at John's numbers and, before last season, he was a guy who averaged 16.5 points, 8 rebounds on 37.6% shooting. That's like a really good basketball player. And in the fact that they, again, got so little back, had to attach whatever, it kind of stinks for fans of the Atlanta Hawks, I would say, that they weren't able, they weren't able to get a little bit more back for him. But, maybe that second round pick turns into Seth Lundy. Who knows?
A beautiful transition from you, Bill. That was A+ expert level podcast work from Bill, who also does his own podcast about Penn State athletics. Okay, so Seth Lundy. All joking aside, and I do mean this, I said this, whether you were here or not, I said this on draft night, I really, really like the pick of Seth Lundy. And look, it's the 46th pick in the draft. I'm not telling you he's going to be a lottery guy. It is what it is, but I had him ranked higher than this. I like the pick a lot. And my general thesis, and I want to know what you think about this, and we'll dive in more, is that there's a very clear path for Seth Lundy to be an NBA player. And that is not always the case for second round picks. So you've seen him play more than I have, even as much as Big Ten basketball as I watch. What is the general pitch for Seth Lundy? And then we'll sort of dive in from there.
Well, you mentioned 46th pick, a little bit higher on your board. He was 47th on our pal Sam Vecini's board. So this is right around the area where I think everyone kind of expected Seth to go. And kind of the pitch for Seth is that beyond the fact that he went to perhaps the worst Power 5 basketball school in college basketball.
Not anymore, Bill. Jalen Pickett went even higher than Seth Lundy did. How about that?
I don't want to try and recreate the noise that I made when Jalen Pickett went that high. Seth comes from a really good, he's a really good foundation where he went to Roman Catholic High School, one of the best high school basketball programs, if not the best high school basketball program in the city of Philadelphia. It's produced some guys who've made in the NBA, Rasul Butler, Eddie Griffin, Brad Wanamaker, currently Lamar Stevens of the Cleveland Cavaliers went there, and Jalen Duren, currently of the Detroit Pistons, started his career there before transferring down to Montverde Academy in Florida. School's big time athlete was Marvin Harrison, formerly of the Indianapolis Colts, and his son, who Brad's football team has beaten each of the last 2 years.
That's
also
correct.
went to Roman Catholic. Comes from a really good AAU program, team final, based out of Philadelphia. So he has a really good foundation for a basketball career. And Seth is a guy that you look at the two things that he does really well. One, his ability as a shooter. The ability that he had to shoot at volume at Penn State last season was really, really impressive. Last year, he had averaged 14 points, 0.2 points per game, 40% on threes, took 6.4 of them a game, and he shoots them in a lot of different ways. He's a good catch and shoot guy. He's going to do this thing, and Hawks fans are going to be a little bit frustrated about this, I think, where he loves to get the ball and jab step and jab step and jab step and jab step, and then take one dribble and then get to a step back and then take it. And you're going to go, Seth, what the hell are you doing? And he's going to make it for some reason. He just looks like someone who is good at shooting the basketball. And on the other end of the floor, he's a strong and physical man-to-man defender. He's a good point of attack defender when he's really engaged. He came in at 6'4" without shoes, which was a little bit surprising. Penn State listed him at 6'6" and 215 pounds. And he's just built like a rock solid guy. So when you talk about 3-and-D wings in basketball, you are talking about, we want a guy who's going to be able to hit the threes that we generate for him, we're never going to ask him to put the ball on the deck, do anything too impressive. We just want him to catch the basketball and shoot, or be in positions where he can make shots. Seth can do that. Other end of the floor, we want someone who we could put on one of the other team's best perimeter players. Seth can do that to an extent. And if those two things, I think he can ride those two things to being in the NBA for a minute. He's by no means a perfect player, but just starting from that, I think it's a thing that you can really build on to create a really good NBA player.
Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. If you've been trying to find tickets for a big event at the last minute, it can be really stressful. Probably not the best idea for your emotions or your wallets. And after all, ticket buying should not be a hassle, and it really isn't with Gametime. Gametime is the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater. You can avoid stress and get hyped for the fun that you're actually going to have at the event, because Gametime has killer deals and the best price guarantee. In the summer, there's all kinds of things happening around me in Atlanta. I'm sure there are around you as well. With Gametime, it is easy to find awesome deals. Plus, you can also see the images of where your seat's going to be at the venue, and they have protection if your event happens to be canceled. Forget all the months of planning in advance. There are deals tickets right up to the day of the event with Gametime, and the Gametime guarantee also means you get the best possible price. If you find tickets in the same section in the same row for less, you'll be credited 110% of the difference with Gametime. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can buy tickets just a matter of seconds. Plus, they'll be delivered directly to your phone to make things easy. Download the app right now with Gametime. Create an account. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off with Gametime. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So I want to dive into the shooting a little bit, because that's, like you said, I think that's his number one appeal pretty clearly. That's the scouting report that got him drafted. If he was a more ordinary shooter, he wouldn't have been drafted probably.
Yeah.
The 40% from last year, really impressive. Even better than that, catch and shoot opportunities. He shot great on the synergy numbers and in those sort of catch and shoot chances. Also, you mentioned the volume too. He attempted, I think it was like 12.5 per 100 possessions. That's really, really good volume. The Big Ten is kind of a slog pace-wise sometimes, although Penn State played a little bit faster this year, as you well know. But at the same time, the the volume and the accuracy. He didn't shoot that well his entire career at Penn State. That's worth noting.
Mm-hmm.
He did. He sort of improved there, but by all accounts, like the fundamentals are there. It's like it doesn't really feel like a fluke shooting season. He is an older guy, 4-year player, 23 years already. We'll talk about this more on defense too. But you mentioned the 6'4" without shoes on. That kind of is 6'6". You know, like basically like add an inch and a half with shoes, essentially ish, and that puts you at 6'6". But another thing there is that 6'10" wingspan, which is like, I didn't exactly expect that from Seth Lundy. I didn't really realize he was that long in terms of, +4, +5, +6 in terms of wingspan. So, I mean, the pitch on offense, like you said, seems to be the shooting. And crucially, in Atlanta, he's not going to be asked to do much more than that. Mm-hmm. And you just can't have enough. You can't have enough shooters. We saw that last year with this Hawks team. Not that you were watching every minute of the Hawks, Bill, but there were times early in the year where Bogey was hurt, where they just didn't have enough shooting. Like they just did not have the guys. And I'm not saying Seth Lundy is going to play minutes this year. He may never. But if you get 2 injuries and now you have this 23-year-old who can shoot, that guy can be on the floor for you and not kill you. And that's not why you draft someone. You're hoping that he becomes like your 8th man down the line, something like that. That'd be a great outcome with the 46th overall pick in the draft. But shooting plus like knowing what you can and can't do. I mean, you mentioned the jab step thing, but other than that, like I don't get the feeling, and you can correct me because you've seen him more than I have, that he's going to be someone who's going to like make a bunch of mistakes. Like I feel like he's going to be a guy who just does his job, which essentially is going to be spacing the floor and shooting.
Yeah, and he's someone who I was talking to some friends before this podcast. I said I'm going to be going on my pal's pod talking about Seth. And what are the things you want me to mention?
Yeah.
And one thing that came up pretty frequently is that, and this is something I was going to bring up, is that he dribbles a lot. He can get a little bit lost in the sauce when it comes to dribbling, when it comes to trying to man dudes up. You know, I think that Atlanta is going to do a pretty good job of never needing him to do that, never asking him to do that, making it like clear that Seth, we don't need you to do that. He is someone who I think, if he has a free runway to the rim, he's not like someone who's going to dribble it off of his foot or anything like that. And, he is strong enough, he is long enough that I think he will be able to, if he gets to the rim and there's a little bit of resistance, he's not going to be like what you kind of expect some really good shooters to do and just kind of wilt when you face a little bit of pressure.
I want to not to cut you off, but I want to just add something there because, it's not out of the ordinary, even for a guy who projects to be this very easy role player. Like at the college level, he was still someone who was probably an above average, like shot creator. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and most of the time, guys are not like specialists like this in college that get drafted. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the guys who become specialists in the NBA or like not even specialists, but like kind of in that role have bigger roles in college. That's the way this is supposed to work in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And Seth, per 100 possessions, 7.5 attempts from 2, per 100 possessions, 12.5 attempts from 3. So he was doing a little bit extra. But I think one thing that I think is a little bit important, you mentioned his 3-point shooting numbers year over year. Obviously it is correct to mention he hasn't always been a great shooter. Hasn't always been a like super crazy good shooter. Always been a pretty solid free throw shooter, 75%, 81.3%, 86.7%, 80.7%. I think this is where we get into Bill talks about Penn State basketball and vents a little bit. He played 2022-23 was the only year in Seth's entire Penn State career where he had the same coach for more than 1 year in a row. 2019-20, that was his freshman year. Penn State was coached by a guy named Pat Chambers, who they were able to get up to, I think, something like number 8 or 9 in the country. But COVID ends up happening. Pat ends up losing his job due to an off-the-court incident. He lost it so late that they just promoted an assistant who, a guy by the name of Jim Ferry, who I don't think anyone ever, like no one expected him to actually be Penn State's coach. So he goes through that season, and that's the first season, that's his worst season shooting wise. He's at 39.1% as a true freshman on 2.8 attempts per game. with that, a year-long interim coach and a roster where nobody really had any idea what the hell was happening, he was at 32%. Last 2021-22, Penn State hires a guy by the name of Micah Shrewsbury. Micah Shrewsbury was Matt Painter's number one assistant at Purdue. He was a longtime Brad Stevens assistant between both Butler and the Boston Celtics. Brought a more NBA kind of approach style. That's where Penn State was. We saw it in the Celtics this season. They looked for a whole hell of a lot of threes, and Seth saw his volume tick up, but on a roster that wasn't especially good. They were a little bit better than I think anyone anticipated, but that second year that Seth had in an offense that he knew, with players around him that he knew, with a coach who knew exactly how to use him, with all those sorts of things. That's where Seth had his best season. So after shooting 34.8% that first year under Micah, that second year, what ended up being Seth's last year, 14.2 points per game, 40% from three on 6.4 attempts per game. He shot about 53% on twos, which was a career high. He got to the free throw line 3 times a game. Not a ton, but still was a career high at 80.7%. So I wouldn't be surprised if getting into a situation where there's a bit of a stability, and even with all the stuff we mentioned about, various guys aren't going to be, are potentially available or this or this or this. We know Trae Young's going to be there. We know that Quinn Snyder is going to be there. And I think Seth is going to be a guy who, with the familiarity of Atlanta, if he's able to get an opportunity, which he's a second-round draft pick, no guarantee that happens. He's 23 years old, don't know how much upside there is, blah, 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 blah. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up doing pretty well as the year goes on, as his career goes on, because he has that level of familiarity and because he's not in situations that are, super tumultuous, don't know who your coach is going to be, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's good context too, for sure. I mean, and it's going to be, I'm sure he'll play some in College Park this year. There's kind of two different kinds, I would say, of these second round picks, or two ways, or what. It's like there's the high upside guy with the tools, and there's sort of the maybe not always low upside, but more like practical. And he's more in that category where like it's very easy to see him playing relatively quickly. I don't know how much upside there is. And look, I think this is not a shocking thing to say. He's going to have to make shots.
Yes.
Like he's going to have to shoot well from three. I think he will, but he's going to have to. And then everything else is kind of supporting that. I mean, I want to make sure we get to the defense a little bit because, like, he's athletic enough to hold up. I think he's not a non-athlete at all. I think you mentioned before, like he can get to the rim a little bit, not a strength of his, but like he's not like completely unable to do so. And for this archetype, he strikes me as like a solid athlete. He's not going to be a great NBA athlete probably on the wing, but given the wingspan and the fact that he can move and he's fairly strong as like he's an adult basically. Like I think he'll be kind of fine. Is that what you think on the NBA? I mean, not going to be a huge plus, I don't think defensively, but not going to be a guy that's like huge target on his back either. It feels like.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. He is he's not a guy who's going to jump out of the gym. He's not a guy who is like shockingly quick. Not a guy who, he doesn't have that stuff. He's good at playing man-to-man. His defense did take a bit of a step back his senior year in Happy Valley. But he's a very willing defender, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Willing defender. When he's locked in on that end of the floor, that's usually where the best of Seth will come. As an off-ball guy, and this is just kind of his thing. When he's off the ball, maybe not as locked in, maybe he gets beaten in this kind of situation, but he was a college kid playing basketball. That's something that in the pros you can get ironed out. You can kind of learn a little bit more from that. But I think with his length and with his strength, to just kind of use an example, I don't think you're going to want him guarding someone who just blows by guys on the perimeter, because I think he'll get a little bit reachy. That's where fouls will pop up. But if you're putting him on a more physical dude on the perimeter, a guy who tries to overpower wings, and that's how he's able to get to the rim, get to his spot, whatever, I think Seth will do a good job against them. So, we talk to kind of put it all together with him. The thing that interests me about the Hawks, and I will now hijack your podcast and ask you. The thing that interests me about him on the Hawks, Brad, is Atlanta has a bunch of different wings who I think are, similar-ish archetypes of guys. And in Seth, you're bringing in a guy who he's going to make a tenth of what DeAndre Hunter makes. He's going to make a fraction of what Sadiq Bey ends up making. He'll make a bit less than what AJ Griffin ends up making. When I look at how he can get on the floor, if the Hawks decide, DeAndre, we're going to try and find a new home for you. I don't think he's as good as DeAndre Hunter right now by any stretch of the imagination, but I think he could step in and do like an admirable impression of just an NBA wing, which for a team like Atlanta that maybe has some stuff with spending money right now, isn't the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, no, and I think that you're right. It would take some attrition for him or any second round pick to play as a rookie on this roster. That's kind of implied. I feel like hopefully you understand what we're saying there. I think Lundy is a lot closer to being able to play than most second round picks would be based on age and skill set, especially on a team like Atlanta where he'll be set up by Trae Young. That is makes your life easy on offense if you're a shooter on this team. Defensively, if you're looking at this is not a perfect comparison, but on the current Hawks, the comp there is like the younger version of Bogey, like not a great athlete, but strong, similar size, kind of get by with know-how. I think this is a very, very simple way to put it, but I think that being around someone like Bogey, it would be great for Seth Lundy. Yeah. Be like, hey, he's never going to be as good as Bogey. I'm pretty confident in that as far as like career-wise. But a guy to learn from, a vet who like knows all the tricks. Bogey knows exactly what to do. They're kind of the same size, both shoot first guys, not great athletes, but kind of strong and know how all that stuff. So I'm just trying to paint a little bit of a Hawks picture. But yeah, I do agree totally that like, let's say you get 2 injuries in a trade or something, and it's November, and you look on the bench and say, you know what, we need someone who can shoot the basketball right now. I think that you could probably play Seth Lundy for 10 minutes and he won't look out of place, which is not a small thing for me.
Yeah. And a thing that I think is going to, the reason I was so excited as a Penn State basketball fan seeing Seth go here is that Seth's best year came under a really creative offensive head coach who knows how to get his guys looks in Micah Shrewsbury, and a point guard in Jalen Pickett who's just really smart, really crafty, really good at throwing guys open or seeing guys when they are open, even if it's a difficult pass, and getting them the ball where they want so they can just fire away and not have to worry about anything else. And he's going to a situation like that, or an NBA version of that situation with a point guard in Trae who is just going to be able to get him the ball in his spots wherever he wants it, and the guy coaching Quinn Snyder who Seth goes in there and impresses Quinn Snyder from the rip, and that accelerates things a bit. And if he could be a guy who hits shots, like Quinn Snyder won't care that he's a second round rookie. He will try to find ways to get him shots from the perimeter. So long way to go. Don't want to assume anything, but again, all jokes aside, you mentioning to me a month ago, hey, guess what? You're coming on Seth. I really do think this is one of the better fits that Seth could have had among teams that were picking in the second round.
I like it too. And same thing, like, the Hawks kind of had their 2 second round picks, and Muhammad Gay is much more of a swing, like not in a bad way. I like that pick, but he's more of a toolsy upside guy. Whereas they went a little bit more utilitarian with Seth Lundy. I think it's a little bit more easy to project. And that's kind of what I recommend most teams doing. If they have 2 second round picks, it's like kind of a good mixture of something to do. And I like the pick a lot. And, I said that without you, and I'll say it here with you. So I'm sure he'll play in Summer League. They haven't announced the roster yet. I'm assuming he will be out there. Probably not the best possible context for a guy like him. Like, I think he's going to be better probably when they get actually into playing with real sets and stuff like that. But Summer League is Summer League, so I'm sure no one will overreact to anything that happens in Las Vegas, up and down the entire league, really.
Yeah, like they're going to. I don't think either of us would be especially surprised if Kobe Buffkin is playing point guard in Summer League, and like
I expect him to play a lot of point guard in Summer League.
Yes. And like respectfully to Kobe Buffkin, like he's not Trae Young, and like guys like
in Summer League is Summer League in general. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's things to love about summer league. It's not always the best context for players that are not on the ball. Like off-ball guys who need support are not usually propped up in summer league.
So for a guy like Seth, for a guy like an AJ Griffin, insert guy who has the label of 3-and-D wing here. Like, it's not going to be a great situation, but I guarantee that we're going to be sitting here in late September, early October, and just the fact that these guys are playing with Trey, even a guy like Kobe is going to benefit from being around Trey, but just those kinds of wing players, they're going to be around Trey and they're going to be like, oh God, like look at what this guy is doing to make me better at basketball. It's going to be quite fun. And as you said, for the love of God, please do not draw any conclusions from summer league that don't have to do with like that guy's tall.
I would co-sign that. Well, Bill, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I appreciate all of your Penn State insider nonsense. You're wearing a Penn State shirt right now, even though people can't probably see the entire thing. There it is. If you're watching on YouTube, you cannot see Bill's shirt. But thank you, sir. You have plenty to do. I'm looking forward to the next few days of dime madness when it comes to free agency, and we'll be talking about all kinds of stuff around the league. Where can folks find all of your work, and honestly, maybe even your Penn State stuff? Usually, I'm probably not a huge Penn State contingent covering listening to the Locked On Hawks podcast. Maybe there's some right now with Seth Lundy. Maybe there's people Googling Seth Lundy's name. Where can they find all of the things that you do?
First off, my man Jason, I know you listen to the podcast. I know you're a Penn State grad. I know you are an Atlanta Hawks fan. Shout out to you. Major League Soccer forever. But yeah, I over on Twitter at Bill DiFilippo. The podcast is called Roar Lions Roar at RLR blog on Twitter. We're in Penn State football mode mostly right now. And then over at Dime, me and Brad are among the contents men over there doing the contents people. That is accurate. Doing the best we can. We do try. It's a good time. Yeah,
it is a good crew. Bill is one of the best people that I know. So thank you, Bill, for letting me have this time with you talking about Seth Lundy. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, and we'll see you all next time.